Well, welcome back, boys and girls, to the Big Bible Show. We're glad that you're joining us. And today, what does the word impossible and a Ziploc bag full of water have to do with our Bible story? The word today is impossible, and we'll come back to this Ziploc bag full of water in just a little bit. We are so glad that you joined us today, and we have been talking about the exciting story of Moses, and of course, God calling Moses at the burning bush, and Moses and his brother Aaron go before Pharaoh, who has enslaved the Hebrew people, the Israelites, in slavery for 430 years. And what seemed like something that was impossible, God is going to save them and bring them out of bondage. Now, you remember last time we talked about how Moses went before Pharaoh with the "let my people go" message from God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Remember we talked about that? And he said, "No way." And so God brought 10 plagues. Do you remember that, boys and girls? And remember that last plague was the death of the firstborn son. And Pharaoh's household suffered that terrible loss. The Israelites, they were spared those plagues because, of course, they were trusting in God, and they also put the blood of the lambs over their doorpost, and the angel of the Lord passed over. So Pharaoh finally relents, and he says, "You can leave." And so he loads them up. He even gives them gold and silver to hurry them along. And so Moses leads the Israelite people out of Egypt. And historians tell us there was about a million of them that left. Can you imagine that large crowd of people going out into the desert and the wilderness? But God was with them because he gave them a pillar of cloud by day to lead them into the promised land. And at night, he gave them a pillar of fire. So they knew always where they were going, with Moses leading them and God leading the people. And so they make their way finally to the Red Sea, and they can't go any further. So our story, you can read about it, Exodus 14 and 15. And they go to the Red Sea, and they can't go any further. Now, the bad news is Pharaoh changed his mind again, and he said, "I'm not going to let them go. I'm not going to let go all that labor that he had free." And so he orders his people, his army with their chariots, to go after the Israelites, the Hebrew people, and bring them back. And so there they go. They order the people, the army of Pharaoh, to go and chase after them. Now, when the Hebrews, the Israelites, saw that, they began to become afraid and began to complain to Moses and said, "Why'd you bring us out here to die?" And so Moses and Aaron had to deal with that. Moses said, "Don't worry. Don't fear. Trust in God. You're going to see something incredible. God's going to do something amazing before your eyes." And so he had Moses take his staff. We've talked about that staff, and raise it up, and he would part the waters from the Red Sea so the Israelites, the Hebrews, could walk across the dry land. And that's exactly what they did. Now, I've always wondered, were there fishes and sharks and dolphins in that water? I mean, can you imagine that, walking by and you see all these fish and in the water? But that's exactly what happened. They got to walk on dry land, the Israelite, the Hebrew people, God's people. Well, the Egyptians saw that and they thought, "Hey, we can do that too." And so they began to go across the dry land. But then Moses has his staff go back down, and the water destroys them, and they all drown in the water with their chariots. And God's people rejoiced, and they even wrote a song in Exodus 15, the Song of Moses, that they praised God for their deliverance. You know, I think there's a message here for us, boys and girls. You know, did you come back to our word, impossible? And we need to trust in the Lord when things seem impossible. Have you ever faced something that you thought, "There's no way I can do this. It's too hard. It's too big of a job. It's impossible for me to do"? You know, I think about what the proverb writer says in Proverbs 3 and verse 5. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." You know, go back to the Israelites. The Red Sea was in front of them. The Egyptian army was behind them. They had nowhere to go. And so they needed to trust in God and not lean on their own thinking. That's what faith is. Faith is trusting and believing in what God has said. And I think that's an important message for us as well. You know, when you do the possible, God does the impossible. Isn't that amazing? When we do what God asks us to do, to obey Him, to trust Him, God will do beyond what we can do. God does the impossible. God helps us do what we think we can't do. He gives us the strength to do what we can't do. And so we have that God, that kind of a God with us. We just have to trust Him that He can do the impossible. You know, one of our problems is if you take off the first two letters of our word, look now what it says. Possible, look at the first two letters. I am. I'm. Sometimes I'm the problem. God can't work and do what He needs to do through me because I get in the way of the impossible, of God working in my life. And so no matter what we face, boys and girls, let's trust God that He can do and work in incredible ways like He did with the parting of the Red Sea and this miracle. And you remember what Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 14 and verse 27. Jesus said, this is when they were on the storm on the Sea of Galilee. And remember, they thought they were drowning and going to die. Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. That's our verse in the New Testament for today. Take courage, don't be afraid. Jesus says, it is I. God does the impossible. You know, let me illustrate it with a simple way that I think will help us. So we got our Ziploc bag here, full of water. And I'm going to take just 3 ordinary pencils here, and I'm going to stick them through this bag, Ziploc bag full of water. Now, you might think the water's just going to spill all over the place and go all over. But watch, and this is really what we've got to do. We've got to do what God calls us to do the possible, to do the commandments and what He calls us to do as boys and girls, and then watch God do the rest. Trust God to do what we think is impossible. So let me put them through here. There's 1. Let's see if we can get another one. There's 2 and 3. Look at that, boys and girls. No water gone. When we do what is possible, what God calls us to do, God then does the impossible, what we think can't be done. Let's trust in God that He can do the impossible, and that's what the people learned with Moses and this incredible story of the parting of the Red Sea. We're glad that you joined us, and we hope that you'll watch next week on the Big Bible Show. Okay, boys and girls, you take care. Bye-bye.